Thank the Minister and recognize the member from Vancouver Fairview.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and it's my pleasure to rise to speak to the amendment to the throne speech. I had planned to speak to the throne speech, but I think the amendment makes some very important points and fits well into the kind of discussion we need to have in this House, an honest discussion about what ideas the government is putting forward or isn't putting forward. But let me first start by responding to the first of the Attorney General's two speeches, the short one to the amendment, in which she expressed in her view that there was no need for this amendment because the government was putting forward a positive vision for the future. Presumably a vision of hope, presumably a roadmap for the future for British Columbia, presumably new ideas about how we can grow our economy. She went on to speak later in her speech to the throne speech about a government that stood up for a diversified economy. I beg to differ with the Attorney General, Honourable Speaker. It would be lovely to hear a positive vision for the future in this chamber from this government in a throne speech. But it's not just me or my colleagues who don't believe we've heard that in the last few days. It's commentators from around the province. The truth is, Honourable Speaker, that the reason this amendment was moved by my colleague from Coquitlam-Millardville is because the throne speech is empty. It's devoid of new ideas. It's filled with platitudes. It's filled with the repetition of promises that have been made over and over and over again and have yet to be fulfilled. Promises unkept to the people of British Columbia unless one believes that a promise to balance the budget, no matter what the cost to working families throughout this province, no matter what the cost to their futures, no matter what the cost to their hopes and aspirations, is in fact a promise worth keeping. Honourable Speaker, it's worse than simply a throne speech filled with platitudes, a throne speech that tries to rewrite history by saying that this government has been committed and fostered a diversified economy when everybody in British Columbia, including the business community, knows that unless you were willing to talk about LNG, you couldn't get through the door. This is a throne speech that is cynically empty. It's a throne speech that doesn't offer hope. It's a throne speech, quite frankly, that could not be better designed to foster disengagement among British Columbia's young people, disengagement amongst British Columbia voters, and that, Honourable Speaker, is exactly what works in the government's business, in the government's interest. Have British Columbians believe that government is essentially meaningless to them, that government will not do anything to help them fulfill their dreams, that government is irrelevant to building a better society, irrelevant to building a better future, and that their hopes and dreams for their children will continue, Honourable Speaker, to be sacrificed for the government's friends, for the wealthiest British Columbians, but not in their interests, not in their children's future, not in the interests of building a truly diversified economy that could grow even more jobs, not in the interests of taking the steps that many people around this province have recommended to this government, whether it be directly in meetings, whether it be in conferences, whether it be in submissions to the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services. Those entreaties, Honourable Speaker, those hopes and dreams, those ideas for practical, strategic, cost-effective actions that this government could take to grow the technology sector, could take to grow the clean energy sector, could take to grow the tourism sector, could take to build jobs and a skilled workforce for the future. It simply has fallen on deaf ears. For whatever reason, it's beyond me, Honourable Speaker. It seems to me that cost-effective investment that diversifies the economy, that builds a future for children, would be a good thing to do. But it appears, Honourable Speaker, that this government, as reflected in this throne speech, and as reflected in the last election platform, would rather go for the quick, easy hit. The quick, easy 5-second clip, and believe that it will work. Honourable Speaker, this is a throne speech that pays no attention to the concerns of everyday working families in British Columbia. It's a throne speech, as reflected in the amendment moved by my colleague, that even though we've seen wages fall in British Columbia, even though we've seen a growing gap between the wealthiest British Columbians and everyone else, a gap that exceeds that in other parts of the country, even though we've seen families and individuals continually pay more for services, pay more in fees, pay more in any number of hits to their pocketbook that are filling the void left by this government in the budget by choosing repeatedly, and particularly in the upcoming budget, to reward their friends, reward the wealthiest 2% of British Columbians with $236 million in tax breaks. Honourable Speaker, this is a throne speech that has offered no hope to British Columbians, that has not said, we are going to deal with the rising fees, we are going to deal with the continuous hit on your pocketbooks, we are going to deal with the fact that it is harder and harder and harder for you every day to make ends meet. Harder and harder and harder for you every day to see a roadmap to a prosperous future for yourself, for your children, for your families. Instead, Honourable Speaker, we get, as we got earlier today during question period from the Minister of Transportation, we get empty words. We get words that sound good, that sound like what British Columbians want to hear, but in fact are baseless. They're baseless in the actions of this government. The Minister of Transportation said just earlier today that this government was going to keep its promise to residents of Metro Vancouver that they would have a say over any new taxes and fees. Honourable Speaker, it's beyond me how the Minister of Transportation can claim that. I suppose if he's focusing it purely on the plebiscite on transit in Metro Vancouver, he is arguably keeping an election promise. But Honourable Speaker, Honourable Speaker, I would hope the Minister of Transportation would hear me out, because if he is sincere in his belief that British Columbians should have a say over any new taxes and fees, then, Honourable Speaker, where is their say over a significant hike in medical services plan premiums? Honourable Speaker, where is their say in this year's considerable hike in medical services plan premiums, in premiums that have almost doubled during the term of office of this Liberal government? Honourable Speaker, they have no say, they've had no say, and they will have no say, because this government would rather give a $236 million tax break to people who don't need it, at the expense of everyone else in this province. So, Honourable Speaker, I say, through you to the Minister of Transportation and to this government, your words are meaningless to everyday British Columbians. Your words are meaningless to British Columbians. Honourable Speaker, did the people of British Columbia have a say over the taxes that were needed to support the Port Mann Bridge? Let's not have a discussion here over whether it was a good project or not. Did they have a say? Honourable Speaker, when the Premier, Honourable Speaker, when the Premier stated after scribbling some numbers on the back of a napkin and going through a pretty rushed and pretty unsubstantial so-called consultation, that this government was committed to replacing the Massey Tunnel with a new bridge, a bridge that is yet to be designed, a bridge that she estimated would cost in the neighborhood of $3 billion and plus, but difficult to put a figure on, Honorable Speaker, because it's not a bridge that is going to begin much before the 2017 election. It's a bridge that doesn't have a design, although it was presented with a photograph of a different bridge. Did the people of Metro Vancouver or British Columbia have a say in the taxes that will be needed to support that? No, Honorable Speaker, they didn't. And they won't. Because this government is very good at saying what people want to hear at certain moments about certain issues, but the rest of the time, Honorable Speaker, they just do whatever they want. Honorable Speaker, let me return to transit. It's not just transit riders in Metro Vancouver who need transit. It's not just transit riders who will benefit from transit. People who are forced to use cars will benefit from reduced congestion. Studies that were done in Ontario around a proposal to build transit there showed that the cost saving of reducing congestion with their proposals, and this is very interesting, and the Transportation Minister, I hope, will listen to this, the saving for transit users was in the neighborhood of $1,000 a year. This is compared to something like a little under $200 for hit on the family for proposed sales tax increase. And yet car drivers would save almost double that. Save almost double that, Honorable Speaker, because they're not idling in traffic, burning gasoline pointlessly for which they pay and which contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. Honorable Speaker, there's also an overriding provincial interest in reducing congestion in Metro Vancouver because it is a port centre, and commodities from around this province need to come through the port centre and get to port. It's a matter of efficiency. It has an impact on the economy, just as the efficient movement of people providing goods and services around the region is an economic issue. The Business Council of BC estimated that it was in the neighborhood of billions of dollars that were being lost by not taking action. So, Honorable Speaker, let me return to the point. The point being that the Transportation Minister said that British Columbians will get a say over new fees and taxes. And that's why they're voting on a referendum that was ill-advised in the first place, that I and other colleagues and the mayors of Metro Vancouver criticized, but which we're stuck with as the only way to make the necessary investment in transit. But is it necessary, Honorable Speaker? $236 million tax break to the wealthiest 2% of British Columbians would almost pay for the amount of money that is being proposed to be raised by a sales tax to invest in transit in Metro Vancouver, because the Premier and this Minister believe that with this one action, they can claim to be ultra-democrats and give British Columbians and Metro Vancouver residents a say over new fees and taxes. Honourable Speaker, if the Transportation Minister means that, if the Premier means that, then, Honourable Speaker, let them put that tax break for the rich to a vote of everyone in British Columbia and see what answer we get then. Honourable Speaker, when I talk to people in my constituency of Vancouver Fairview, when I meet with seniors, they express to me the limitations on their mobility, the limitations on their quality of life by not having sufficient access to HandyDART if they have mobility challenges, by not having sufficient access to home care so that they can remain in their community, in their home, at a lower cost to everyone else in the province. Honorable Speaker, they talk about, and their children talk to me about, the inadequacy of assisted living and a whole realm of healthcare services that are important to give seniors quality of life, to support them and their families that want desperately to take care of them, but are struggling with many of their own issues, making ends meet, taking care of their children. Honorable Speaker, seniors still don't have the flexible options that are needed for home care or assisted living. Honorable Speaker, when I talk to young people in Vancouver, Fairview, or elsewhere, they're concerned. They face uncertain job prospects. They face uncertain job prospects because this government talks a good line about education and training, but they treat it as a zero-sum game. Honorable Speaker, when they promise British Columbians that they will train young people for the jobs that will be needed in the resource sector in this province, they say that it will be at the expense of other sectors for which people need to be educated. And let me give you an example. I met recently with people in the animation industry, a very successful company that is based both in my constituency of Vancouver Fairview and in Kelowna. Honorable Speaker, the CEO, the president of this animation company, talked about the low number of students that are graduated from the film school. He said he can hire every single one of them and many, many more. But instead, because he can't hire enough new workers who are trained to meet the concerns of contracts, he actually had to turn contracts away. Honorable Speaker, education should not be a zero-sum game. Education should be the investment in our future that we all know it must be. We need to have the courage, Honorable Speaker, and this goes to the positive vision for the future that the Attorney General mentioned. We need to have the confidence in the future that we will do what it takes to invest in the resources that people need, that young people need, to be prepared not just for jobs in LNG or in mining or in construction or in the trades, but for the jobs that we hope to create in the technology sector, the jobs that we can create in digital media, the jobs that we can create in tourism. Instead, Honorable Speaker, this government spent almost 2 years of its term and virtually all of the election campaign talking about one sector only, liquefied natural gas. All of its eggs in one basket, as my colleague from Coquitlam-Millardville so eloquently stated. We're now rewriting history, Honorable Speaker, in a throne speech that, aside from its creative chronicling of a past that never happened and a future that probably never will, talks about a diversified modern economy, but has failed to put its money, its energy, or its listening ears where the throne speech voice is. Honorable Speaker, we have a thriving technology sector. We have a technology sector that is doing very well, but we also, Honorable Speaker, have a technology sector that could be doing so much better. And that's why, Honorable Speaker, that's why, even though the BC Technology Industry Association and other groups like Cred BC, who are very bullish on the tech sector and are quite correctly right to praise the very successful companies in British Columbia who've done well, point out the gap, Honorable Speaker, between this province and other provinces in Canada, as well as states south of the border. So let me talk a little bit about some of the facts that go along with this. We have a tech sector that has over 84,000 jobs in British Columbia and many more indirect and induced jobs. And the Technology 2014 report card, which was done for the BCTIA by KPMG, said that compared to other sectors in British Columbia, the tech sector gets an A. That's good news. That is the good news. But unfortunately, Honorable Speaker, against other provinces, the mark was a lukewarm C+. And the reason for that, Honourable Speaker, is our per capita gross domestic product continues to be lower than other provinces in Canada with significant technology sectors. And as well, Honourable Speaker, our per capita employment is lower than provinces with significant technology sectors. Honourable Speaker, if this government really wants to hold out hope to young people who see a future in a green economy that's centered around clean technology and other technology innovations, as well as the tremendous potential of developing and applying technological solutions to our resource sector that will both increase productivity and have a lower environmental footprint and find ways to sequester carbon as we look for ways to meet our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. If this government was serious about it, it would have listened to the recommendations of the BC Technology Industry Association, as well as the recommendations of others. It would have studied the report card and outlined in this throne speech some concrete measures to meet the recommendations. The truth is, Honourable Speaker, that identified by KPMG and others, and the BC Technology Industry Association, we are not developing the needed skills and knowledge that we have here in order to allow the tech sector to grow to its fullest potential. BC lags other provinces in engineering, science, and most other tech-related under and graduate degrees. Honourable Speaker, if this government had a positive vision for the future, it would do more than put empty words in a throne speech. It would do more than try to take credit for the success of an industry that is not properly supported by this government, because it isn't LNG. It would, in fact, have answered the recommendations. Honourable Speaker, another point raised by the BCTIA was that we lag in venture capital investment. Now, Honourable Speaker, it is not the job of government or the taxpayer to fully invest in every tech startup, but it is the job of the government, and this is why people have been so successful south of the border, because whether it's the state of Nevada or Silicon Valley, governments have kick-started investment by demonstrating support for the development of a healthy tech sector, by providing seed capital investment that can and was leveraged with far greater private sector investment. Honourable Speaker, we are smaller than some other jurisdictions. But if, in fact, this government was to demonstrate in a number of ways its commitment by increasing the funding for the BC Innovation Council instead of lowering its funding and then flatlining it for several years as it has, if this government was to provide seed venture capital investment and work with the industry to lobby the federal government for more venture capital investment, then the private sector would look and see that this government didn't just mouth words of support for the tech sector. This government put its money where its mouth is, that it had a commitment, that it believed in the sector, and then that money would come in. Honourable Speaker, that has been demonstrated in other jurisdictions. Honourable Speaker, just to prove my point here and just to show what's at stake here, and let's hold this up against the government's repetition of, frankly, shameless and surprising repetition of a claim that there's 100,000 jobs in LNG and that we can still be debt-free in BC by developing an LNG industry, when everyone else who looks at the sector sees that these claims were outlandish, and that even a modest progress in developing the LNG industry in BC has been put on hold by a number of factors, but yet the government continues to hold out these job numbers. So let me hold out some other job numbers, Honourable Speaker, that are held up. That are held up by studies and could be achieved by some targeted support, even half of the targeted support that this government has indicated it would provide to the LNG industry for a sector that is already thriving, has been working hard to build itself, and could build itself more. Honourable Speaker, the Technology Industry Association has forecast that this sector could grow to $50 billion. $50 billion in industry revenue, account for 16% of provincial GDP, and be at 142,000 jobs. Honourable Speaker, that's almost an additional 60,000 jobs from where we are today in a mere 5 years by 2020. However, that is dependent on sufficient venture capital investment and the kind of actions by government that would support that investment. Without this venture capital investment, the BC Technology Industry Association projects that we will only be at 8% of GDP, not 16% in this sector, 30% less revenue, and a lost opportunity for 31,000 well-paying jobs that are 66% above the BC industrial average. Government support, Honourable Speaker, sends a message. This government is sending the wrong message. This government is sending the wrong message by mouthing empty platitudes in a throne speech, by taking credit for actions that it has never actually taken itself, and by offering no new ideas for building real jobs, a real diversified modern economy, or any of the other measures that should be the kinds of positive steps, positive actions, positive statements that lead to positive outcomes for British Columbians. Instead, Honourable Speaker, this government turns its back on British Columbians who are struggling to make ends meet while rewarding its wealthiest friends, the people in the top 2% of income earning. What could we do with that $236 million, Honourable Speaker? We could do a lot. If that money was invested in transit, Honourable Speaker, according to the government's own figures, the Evergreen Line Rapid Transit Project, which is approximately 11 kilometres long, is expected to generate 4,000 direct person years of employment, or put another way, 850 jobs per kilometre. If the investments that the Mayor's Council has talked about in transit are made, we will create up to 55,000 jobs in the construction phase alone. Honourable Speaker, instead, we're rolling the dice with the referendum under the pretense of giving taxpayers a say over taxes and fees, a say they will get on no other measure proposed by this government, when the government has, in its own budget, the money to actually make this investment, create jobs, help the economy, and move British Columbia forward. Honourable Speaker, I could go on, and I will when I speak to the speech from the throne, but there are opportunities for investment, not just in transit, investment in building retrofits that create jobs all over the province, investment in incremental and distributed clean energy and projects all over the province that will provide more jobs on a more long-lasting basis than a Site C investment pushing $9 billion that will undoubtedly rise over time in one area of the province, creating controversy in a region where people oppose it and alienating First Nations who are concerned about the project. There are alternatives, Honourable Speaker, but we have not seen them in this throne speech. Honourable Speaker, we have not seen solutions for families struggling to make ends meet. We haven't seen solutions for young people, for education, for seniors. Instead, we've seen empty words and empty promises, Honourable Speaker. That's why I support this amendment. That's why I oppose the throne speech as it stands. That's why I reject the assertion of the Attorney General that this is a throne speech filled with a positive vision, when in fact it is filled with nothing but empty, hot air. Honourable Speaker, thank you very much. I will now take my seat.